Timberwolves president of basketball operations, David Kahn. Who is he?
Tell us exactly about this European Blake Griffin.
I don't know. I think Blake Griffin is American numbers.
The Charlotte Hornets select Kobe Bryant.
The Milwaukee Bucks select Dirk Nowitzki from Würzburg, Germany.
I'm Ricky Rubio. I'm not like anybody else, but
It ain't the end of the world. We're going to see each other again. I mean, I'll send her some flowers or some fruit.
All right, and this is Chris Habis once again with NBADraftInsider.com with a new edition of the Draft Forecast. Looking at something different this time. We've been talking to a lot of prospects and a lot of writers about the college basketball season and the prospects. Let's start looking at the NBA lockout for the first time. I've been notoriously quiet with it because I don't want to give it too much more attention than it's got, but I have senior NBA blogger at CBSSports.com as well as the weekend editor for Pro Basketball Talk on NBC.com, Matt Moore, with us on the podcast. How are we doing today, Matt?
I'm good, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good over here. I mean, I know they're in negotiations right now, supposedly going to have more on Saturday. Do we have a resolution coming soon?
Probably not. I mean, when you look at the pace of these negotiations and the fact that we've seen it ramps up and it gets really close to being completed, and then everything falls apart again because they're all idiots. And so it's really hard to kind of see from this point when a solution is going to be in place. Both sides are dug in. The 52-50 BRI divide is where we're at, and neither side wants to go below that, though there's indications that the players are willing to bend. Union leadership at this point isn't. There's lots of media manipulation going on. There's lots of infighting on both sides. The courts are now starting to get involved. It gets messier the more it goes, and it's harder to see that this is going to be resolved anytime soon.
I'm not going to pretend like I'm a financial expert that can go into the BRI, but I'll use Nazir Muhammad of the Oklahoma City Thunder as my expert, and he said that splitting 2% of X amount of millions among 30 people is not the same as splitting it among 450 people when you're talking about the owners versus the players. Where do you stand on that? I mean, do you think the players deserve that extra percentage and the owners should actually take a step back and give those to them?
You know, it's a complicated question. David West found that this morning as well. That's apparently the union's new talking point, which is well, splitting it between 30 people is a lot different than 450 people, and I think that's another indication of how flawed the union's kind of political public strategy is. Because if you tell someone who makes $12 an hour, $15 an hour, who is taking two of his kids to a game, paying for parking and food and everything else that would go into a game, and buying merchandise, and you tell them, well, it's really hard to split these millions of dollars amongst 450 people, that guy's going to want to punch you in the face. And it's just kind of irrelevant to the topic at hand. I mean, the owner side is going to respond with, well, yes, but the big question is the union doesn't take on any risk. There's risk, and then there's also expenses. And one of the things I've heard tossed around Twitter this morning back at Nazir is, well, yeah, but the players don't have any expenses. Well, those people are also ignoring the fact that in the most recent reports out of the negotiations, the owners are taking hundreds of millions of dollars off of the top in expenses. So they're basically saying, it costs this much for us to run basketball, so we're just going to take that off, and everything that's profit we're going to split. That's a little bit different than what they're talking about. I think that the big problem, though, is when you get down to it is trying to say that there's any sort of, who deserves this is going to be really complicated because the teams are owned by the owners, and I believe that the players are both employees and the product, and they do have a certain right to the percentage, and they do definitely have an investment in the growth of the league and how it's structured. I think that they have a right to be in these conversations, that these negotiations should be more even-handed than they've been. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the approach of, well, we have more people, so we need more of the money makes sense, because it doesn't. You're two separate sides. You're represented by two different entities. Those sides are splitting the total piece of the pie, which is 100%. That's what you need to figure out. I think that a more logical response to them would be to say, look, the previous arrangement had 57%, and while it may have expired and we currently do not have anything to do with that prior, CBA, the labor lawyers I've talked to have said, you can't really say that it is or it isn't a precedent. And so I would focus more on the fact, like, look, we were at 57 and they want us to drop all the way down. We've already come this far. We can't go any further or we're just capitulating. If you go to the American public and say, we don't want to get bullied. People will respond to that. They understand that. They understand employers wanting to bully people out of their money. That they'll respond to. But saying, oh, no, it's really hard for us to split all this money because there's so many of us, that's just not going to fly.
Yeah, and David Stern is notorious as being known as a master tacticianer, and he can get on the microphone and sell and spin anything over the past 30 years. Well, these players are a product of what he's been doing for the past 20, 30 years, so they're learning how to spin the stuff in their way as well. And one of the things that was a hot button issue, we talked to it before we jumped on, it was a really big hot button issue, and they changed it in 06, 07, and then now they're talking about changing it again, is the age limitation rule coming into the NBA draft. Are they going to raise the age, drop that off of there, do different things to it? Has there been any discussion lately on that change?
It's been tabled for the time being, I think primarily because they have had such bigger issues to tackle. There are still remaining concerns to be worked out. There's things like the D-League and all these peripheral kind of entities that need to be solved in terms of the CBA, but they're trying to get the major issues out of the way. They've got 95% of those done. It's basically down to a handful of the exceptions, a couple of the contract length things, and then, of course, the BRI. I think that what you will see is that I think that's been in discussions. I think that all indications are that's been at least talked about, that that's something they want to discuss, because I don't think that either side is really happy with it. I think that, from the NBA side, they want players to be more ready. They want them to be, for it to be less of a risk for you to invest a rookie contract on a kid and have him not pan out. That's devastating to a franchise, and yet you want to get as many years under him, so if a kid is 18, he's a freshman, you want to take that chance. At the same time, I think the Players Union really wants to go, obviously, lower. They want it to where, look, there shouldn't be any reason that Derrick Rose is getting hammered by the press and getting hammered by all these people and having lawsuits brought against him by the University of Memphis boosters who are out of their mind because of the fact that basically he was forced into, if he wanted to become the number one draft pick, he had to follow this process of going to college despite it not being the right career path for him. They want to protect those players' earning potential and their ability to make decisions for what's best in their life. And so they really want to eliminate, obviously, the age limitation. I think that probably what you're going to see, if it isn't done in the CBA but is worked on over the course of the next few years, you're probably going to see a move to an either-or situation where it's either going to be 2 years or straight out of high school. And that way, when you've got kids, like Anthony Davis, who grew 6 to 8 inches in the last year, has the guard abilities that he has in terms of passing and handle, and yet he has that 7'4" wingspan. Like, that's a kid that you can look at and automatically go, you know what, that's worth a top 5 draft pick right now. Yeah, regardless of what happens, that would have been worth one, coming out of the draft last year. That really would have been worth it. So I think that Shabazz Muhammad, I think, is another kid that you look at and you go, we'd be ready to make that investment right now. But if they're not ready, if they are able to have coaches come to them and say, look, we'll give you 2 years and you really get to make sure that you're pro ready, you're going to see more of the sophomores have a little bit more of a polish in the NBA game, and that lowers the risk for the coaches that are making those kind of decisions.
And see, and that's an interesting concept because you're never going to have a perfect system. Gerald Green is going to slip through the cracks at the same time as LeBron James is going to burst through them and be ready. So there's always going to be the exceptions to the rules. But on the Point Forward Pro, Zach Lowe for SI.com was reviewing over some of the things that he had heard as far as potentially using a baseball-style system or using a system where for as long as you stay in college, they'll shave years off of the back end of your contract when you come to the NBA. So that way you can have, that flexibility because you decided to go to college. They're going to reward you for going to college by getting you out of that rookie contract earlier so you can earn a bigger contract. Have any of those ideas been really explored, or when they went to and benched this idea, it was really at the either or that you mentioned?
They have definitely been discussed. I mean, those are definitely, Zach's information is right on target. I think that from everything I've heard and people I've spoken with, that's been the indication, is that, they still want to pursue this idea. It's simply going to be a matter of, the union has been so battered in this negotiation that when they get a deal, they may just want to go into a cave and be like, you know what, let's not touch anything else. Let's not fight over anything else. Let's just get a season going, get our players their paychecks, and get going. It's not going to be something where they hold it up. I think that there's going to be continuing conversations about this. And, with the contract issue, that's one where it's got to get solved on the CBA. So if it doesn't get resolved versus the age limit, you can probably adjust and make an adjustment to the CBA as it's going. You can't renegotiate contract lengths. And with the fact that the players are losing years on contracts as is, in terms of, their veterans are being cut down from 5 to 6 years to 4 to 5 years and on down the line, it's going to be hard to kind of get that sold. I think that for the union, it's kind of a tricky issue too, because while there are definitely players that would benefit from that, right? So being able to jump early to free agency means that you get that big contract sooner, and that's the one that you're looking for. That first big contract is really what sets you up financially, and then obviously the second one is the big massive payday when you're 26, 27. But on the other hand of it, you've also got players that come in and, like J.J. Redick. Like J.J. Redick didn't play hardly at all his first few seasons because, Magic coach Stan Van Gundy, which is basically like, you have to play defense. I appreciate your shooting talent. We think that you're a hard worker. Until you learn how to play NBA defense, I can't let you on the floor. If J.J. had jumped earlier, he probably wouldn't have gotten the offers. He would have been stranded and probably ended up on a contract that undervalues his worth. But instead, he did commit to that time frame. He committed to defense, got those abilities, showed phenomenal strength against Ray Allen and versus Boston in several playoff series. And that really is one of the reasons he was rewarded with the contract last year. So I think there's ups and downs for the players because it's not, for the stars, those guys are going to get their money sooner. But the stars are going to get their money regardless. That's not really the issue. I think that it's guys like J.J. Redick and those players that sometimes get buried for the first couple of seasons, that's who the concern is for.
But I also felt very strongly that once the 14-year-old hit the dais with us, we were dead. We were just dead. There was no way. This league has a habit. I'm just going to say habit